Welcome to this live event. Writing is still important. We're going to have a conversation tonight with our author, Paul Kortepeter. He is the author of the Writing and Rhetoric series. So we're so glad you're able to be here. We have quite a variety in our audience tonight. Parents, students, teachers, homeschool families, school leaders, community members, such a variety. And I just want to welcome all of you and extend that welcome to those who are joining us live tonight and those who will also be watching by recording later. So thankful to welcome you to this evening's event. For many years, Classical Academic Press has been honored to serve families, educators, students, and schools in the renewal of classical education. And Classical U, our educator training arm, has offered a lot of resources for classical leaders. And it's now offering monthly live learning events, co-sponsored with the Scholé Communities, which is our network of homeschool and hybrid communities. Also, Scholé Academy is our K-12 online course provider, and it hosts a variety of lecture hall events. In both cases, Classical U and Scholé Academy and Classical Academic Press at large intend to connect our community with fascinating speakers who can lend their perspective and expertise in the joy, the ideas, and the efforts of classical education. I'm Amy Morgan, and I serve as the chair of Scholé Academy's Writing and Rhetoric Department, and I am especially delighted to serve as the host for this evening's event with Paul Kortepeter. He's the author of our Writing and Rhetoric series. My first encounter with the Writing and Rhetoric series was as a homeschooling parent, but since then I have taught most of the series through Scholé Academy. And we have with us also our technical assistant, Jesse Hake. He'll be populating the chat with links that you can follow. One of them you might notice is Paul Kortepeter's Writing and Rhetoric series. So if you'd like to take a closer look at that. So if we still have some people arriving. So as they continue to arrive, let me just share a few announcements about Classical U and our partnering organizations. So Classical U is proud to provide a full service professional development offering by way of professional development planning, consultation, and teacher coaching services. You can visit our professional development page at the link that Jesse is providing in the chat box. Classical U also partners with school networks and accrediting organizations to provide branded training content within our Classical Academic Press platform and the Classical U platform. You can visit the network partnership page also at the link provided. Related to tonight's topic, you can check out the course by Andrew Pudewa. It's called Listening, Speaking, Reading, and Writing, concentrating on the 4 critical arts of language. I myself have watched and viewed the writing segment of that course. From our Scholé communities, visit the Scholé community blog for weekly posts. Recent posts have accompanied our Lenten journey, along with a liturgical Lenten guide. Now, the Western Church, we have finished this, but perhaps some of our Orthodox friends would still enjoy to check out that Lenten guide from the recent Scholé Communities blog post. And finally, from Scholé Academy, Scholé Academy offers restful, live, fun, online instruction in all levels of the Writing and Rhetoric program. In fact, I teach and have taught some of these courses myself. You can visit our courses page to all the courses that are available at every level, elementary through high school. And Jesse is going to put the link to that in the chat to the side. We also offer courses that are unique to particular great Christian traditions, and you can check that out in our Houses of Studies pages. So we have a House of Studies for the Anglican Protestant tradition, the Catholic tradition, and the Eastern Orthodox tradition. All right, we have a great crowd tonight, and those people who were unable to be with us live tonight will also be able to receive a recording of tonight's event, as will you. Right. Great. Well, welcome. And I just want to introduce our guest tonight, Mr. Paul Kortepeter. He has a varied career. It includes movie development, teaching, publishing. While he was a master's student at USC's film school, he edited a documentary movie on the homeless that was nominated for an Academy Award. He spent the next 6 years in Los Angeles developing made-for-TV movies. And more recently, he has worked as a senior editor for Sunrise Publications, where he met artist Susan Wheeler. Those two collaborated in creating picture books for Dutton Children's Books and gift books for Harvest House Publishers. Paul helped to found the Oaks Academy, a private classical school of 1,200 students, which is it's located in Indianapolis, where he currently serves as curriculum director. And I believe Jesse may be also putting a link to the Oaks Academy in the chat box. So Paul, welcome. Before, I guess I want to say something about your writing and rhetoric material, because that's kind of what brings you here tonight. And that's my experience with you. To everyone else, I want to say that, as I said, my experience with writing and rhetoric started as a homeschool parent, but it's also included my experience as an online teacher of books 4 through 11, all the way through 11 of the series. And I chair Scola Academy's writing and rhetoric department. So in that role, I've had the privilege of witnessing how the writing and rhetoric series has developed hundreds of students as thinkers and writers and speakers, but it is done so playfully as it's guided them through the pre-rhetorical and rhetorical development. I've heard from many of my students and their parents reflecting on their experiences with writing and rhetoric, that the students are growing as thinkers as well as writers, and their written results don't sound formulaic. They don't sound full of fluff as they're building. It doesn't sound like they're trying to build to a certain word count. Instead, these students and parents have been excited to report that they are producing thoughtful and beautiful writing, and that they're building confidence as students as they gain their knowledge and skill. So thank you so much for the excellent resource that you provided for these students, and the success that it's helped to bring to students as writers and for thinkers as thinkers. So welcome, Paul, and I just want to pass the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Good evening, everyone. What a joy it is to be just presenting tonight to people who love the next generation so much. This idea of revitalizing classical education, what an amazing endeavor that is. I wish I could be with you in person tonight, but Zoom, and I guess is the next best thing. I have some prepared remarks that I'll be referring to this evening, and then after that, Amy and I can have a little conversation about some of your questions. So I'm addressing this subject tonight. Why is writing still important? And I hope then to give some tips too on helping students to be better writers, and also to talk a little bit about rhetoric. So writing is still important. It seems almost unbelievable that I would be addressing this idea. Only 2 years ago, writing was an incontestable, unique form of human expression. The written word was our sacred domain and stood at the summit of human creativity. Nothing could upstage, at least in my mind, Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings saga, not even a 6-part movie series shot in the spectacular fjordland of New Zealand. But in the realm of the virtual world, the written word has been losing ground for decades. We've been interacting with huge volumes of writing and emails and texts and snippets of information. More writing is being generated than ever before. Most of what we generate is brief, shallow, and disposable. It's what I've come to see as digital newsprint. Newsprint implies an overwhelming flood of superficial or trivial information. I remember as a cub journalist, I was sweating over the lead of an article I was writing, and the clock was ticking well beyond 10 o'clock at night. We used typewriters in those days. The sports writer laughed at me and said, Kid, don't fool yourself. In 2 days, that article of yours is going to be lining the bottom of a birdcage. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be well written, I retorted. Oh, yeah, pal, said the sports writer. The parakeets are going to love your story. The parakeets would also love texting, the newsprint of our day. Our daily writings accumulate online in vast amounts of virtuality. Each day on Earth, we generate 500 million tweets, 294 billion emails, 4 million gigabytes of Facebook data, 65 billion WhatsApp messages, and 720,000 hours of new content added on YouTube. That's every day. Think about the word virtual. It means existing in essence, though not in actual fact or form. In other words, it's not fully formed, it's incipient, immature, not even physically existent. So why do I care? I worry that young people who spend long hours immersed in a digital world might lose the desire, much less the ability, to create beautiful narratives and essays. Anything we do for long hours changes our brains. Depending on what you study, what study you quote, the average teen is spending 7 to 9 hours a day on phones and screens, 7 to 9 hours. The NIH found that students who spend more than 7 hours a day on digital devices are experiencing premature thinning of the outer layers of their brain, which is their cerebral cortex. This layer of the brain is responsible for information processing, reasoning, impulse control, and understanding language. And that was all before ChatGPT came along. I want to assure you that my goal here is not to rail against the machine, or at least not too much. Some railing against virtuality and artificial intelligence is warranted. AI can be seen in some respect as an abolition of man, his work, his creativity, his meaning derived from his work. I acknowledge that it's here to stay and it will be a useful tool in many fields. However, we have some decisions to make over how much we let it take over our lives and our strivings. I may be preaching to the choir, but I think whether literally or figuratively, we need to smash our televisions and our cell phones. When I was 10 years old, my dad came home from work and greeted his 4 children. We children were too busy watching Bonanza to greet him in return. So he calmly unplugged the TV over our protests and marched upstairs with the TV in his arms. TVs in those days were grossly heavy and full of tubes. The next thing we knew, he had heaved the TV out the second-story window, and we saw it crash into hundreds of pieces on the front lawn. In retrospect, I blessed him for this outrageous act, and I made sure to greet my parents after that whenever they arrived home. We want technology to better our lives in the real world, upgrade our electrical grid, strengthen our national defenses, improve food security, clean up the oceans, create safer airplanes. Instead, the tech wizards of Silicon Valley suck us deeper and deeper into a morass of screen time, into an unreal world with few tangible benefits. Indeed, we all know that kids are suffering from unprecedented levels of anxiety and depression. Like many of you, I've taken ChatGPT for a spin. It can whip out a 5-paragraph essay in 3 seconds flat. The essay is insipid, but I feel somewhat petty mentioning deficiencies when the technology is so astonishing. Upon Chat's debut in 2022, cultural observers immediately opined that the college essay is dead, that ChatGPT will end high school English. There is a good case to be made for pessimism. High school and college students are fully wired, and everything they write is done with a keyboard and screen. So it is quite easy to pop into any one of half a dozen chatbots and have them construct a sentence here and a paragraph there for cutting and pasting. Google and Grammarly also use generative AI to complete our thoughts. Young people often take the path of least resistance when it comes to the effort of schoolwork. Chatbots represent one easy way to circumvent the rigors of attention, reflection, and thoroughness. If children are allowed to take shortcuts when faced with difficult tasks, they almost certainly will. They become less capable of inviting struggle and persistence into their studies. Sometimes struggle is the point. Young people need to grow in understanding that life is naturally full of struggle, which is to be strenuously engaged with problems and undertakings. If they don't embrace struggle, they won't develop resilience and they become entitled and ornery, like one of my favorite characters, Veruca Salt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Our devices also eliminate time for boredom and rest, which are the necessary laboratories for creativity. Boredom is healthy. It leads to inventiveness. Unless students have a well-developed sense of ethics, they will not see much harm in using machine-generated compositions. The Center for Academic Integrity tells us that 58% of high school students admit to plagiarism. Chatbots make that all the easier. So, do I think that writing is still important? Yes, yes, and yes, as much as ever. Of course, there are still pragmatic reasons to write. Writing skills are strongly correlated with career advancement. It makes sense. On the job, you need to make sense. Professionalism demands competent grammar, spelling, and punctuation. In a professional setting, we often speak how we write. I'm never as articulate in speech as I am in writing, but writing most definitely shapes my speaking. In other words, as we polish our writing, we are becoming more polished thinkers and speakers. Customers and colleagues alike treat someone who is clear and to the point, and yet who is also nuanced enough not to sledgehammer every conversation, with trust. Learning to write well teaches us to nuance our thoughts and words. When we wrestle with words, how best to express ourselves, we are expanding our vocabulary and our sentence variety. A sentence is nothing more than a complete thought. When we think in sentences, our thoughts are becoming fully formed. When we wrestle with paragraphs, we are strengthening the chronology of our ideas. Have you ever had a friend who talks in circles and never gets to the point? A healthy dose of linear writing would help your friend toward a conclusion. Many authors have observed that we write to think. We don't necessarily know what we think unless we write it down. And even then, the first iteration rarely suffices. We must rewrite and rewrite and rewrite to discover what we truly want to say. This leads me away from the practical benefits of writing to the deeper importance of writing. Writing enhances our humanity. In a time when we are losing grip on material reality, writing puts us back in touch with reality. How? We often see ourselves as in a mirror darkly until we sit down to write. Our most careful thinking, our loves and our affinities, our fears and antipathies come into focus when they take shape in visible words. What we see on the paper or on the screen is our thinking made visible. And then once we develop a writing voice, it's like a fingerprint. There is no voice like our own. Writing also puts us in touch with other people. The writer must always consider the needs of her audience. As strange as it sounds, even a diarist writing the most personal of thoughts is thinking about an audience. Who will eventually read the diary? Our future self? Or maybe our progeny? Or maybe we'll be discovered like English diarist Samuel Pepys for all of posterity. Writing is an audience-driven pursuit, even if we are an audience of one. However, we are most often seeking to build relationships with our writing. We are trying to build a bridge of understanding between ourselves and other people. In addition to putting us in touch with reality and other people, writing builds our intellectual stamina. As I touched on before, learning to write is hard. This is because writing makes big demands on cognitive function, all at the same time. We need to employ motor skills, process vocabulary, sequence and organize ideas, engage grammatical concepts, and draw upon a reservoir of good writing. Hopefully that reservoir exists as a template of new writing. The ancients recognized the connection between writing and exercise. The progymnasmata, or preliminary writing exercises, have the same Greek root as gymnasium, a place to exercise or train. Muscle and bone strength is a use it or lose it proposition. So is neurogenesis. We now know that new neurons are kept alive in the brain only by effortful learning. This process involves concentration in the present moment of experience, as well as over some extended period of time. The brain will incorporate new neurons into its circuitry as long as they are used shortly after generation. Otherwise, the new neurons will die off. Writing requires training, progymnasmata, and the effort of writing is an essential workout for our brains. As it turns out, writing has all sorts of neurological benefits. Neural connectivity, for example, writing engages multiple regions of the brain simultaneously: language processing, sensory motor, executive function, and the pathways are strengthened between them. Writing involves the retrieval and integration of information from memory, which strengthens memory recall. Regular writing practice also enhances attention and focus, which are necessary to building healthy relationships with people, with ideas. So just as an aside, writing is a challenge for many boys, and especially kids with ADHD. I sometimes think that the majority of my own academic problems in elementary school were tied to my being figuratively chained to a desk. I sat by the window watching the clouds drift by and dreamed of being outdoors. This is a boys' issue more than a girls' issue. The reality is that our traditional schools are arranged to be more friendly to girls. By and large, words are the domain of girls. Words are abstractions, and most girls at home are at home in a world of words. Actions are more often the domain of boys. Our curricula need to be balanced between words and actions. One has to sit still, metaphorically speaking, with one's thoughts in order to write. Here is some unasked for advice that you may have already considered when writing with attention-challenged kids. Minimize distraction in an orderly workspace. Use graphic organizers and visual aids. Show your child his location on the graphic organizer and the day's task ahead. Make those tasks shorter in duration. Focus on subjects that appeal to him. Include physical exertion beyond the writing tasks. Let him dictate ideas and sentences to you as the scribe. Let him include action and pictures in his writing. Pacing back and forth in a room is one of the ways I pre-write to keep my mind and body active at the same time. In the end, writing puts us in touch with ourselves and our other people. It constructively orders our brains and strengthens our resolve. It has pragmatic career benefits, and the primary benefit there is that we learn to communicate effectively. For many of us, writing is also a joyful act. We love to be alone with our thoughts, to construct characters and stories, to celebrate the people we love, and to reflect on the meaning of life. Excuse me. So that now we've covered writing, now that we've covered why it's important, let's talk about how young people can become better writers themselves. In a word, reading. Reading is the royal road to writing well. Writing skills come with much less effort if a child dedicates daily time to reading. I almost wish my series of books was titled Reading, Writing, and Rhetoric. Every chapter is dedicated to context and then to central narrative or nonfiction exemplar. Students must hear books frequently read by parents and teachers so that they bathe in that fluency. Students must also spend plenty of time solo reading, either aloud or silently, and reading in partnership with other fluent readers. Think about how a child learns language in the first place. Infants are immersed in language from birth, and they hear speech from parents and siblings. This constant exposure to language provides infants with opportunities to hear a wide range of words and sentence structures, which in turn helps them eventually to produce words themselves. Reading is the language bath of writing. Just as a child who soaks in a language bath of Urdu will learn to speak Urdu, we naturally imitate the style of writers we become engrossed with. When I was going through my youthful Narnia phase, I found myself writing unconsciously in the style of C.S. Lewis. I tried to write crisp, straightforward prose. My characters had allegorical qualities. I created an alternate world. As in Narnia, magical things happened. You could open a closet and roll out a yacht or a rhinoceros. I love swordplay, and I borrowed pseudo-medieval voice from Robert Louis Stevenson from the Black Arrow. And then I went through an Ian Fleming phase, and all that went out the window. As a young man, I'm embarrassed to admit that I did enjoy the James Bond novels back in the day. However, Fleming was a pretty smooth stylist, and he also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, so there. When I was in this phase, I tried to end every chapter with a cliffhanger. My writing became glib and fast-paced, minimal, with few descriptions, and focused on plot and gadgetry. I created a fast-talking protagonist. It was all awful rot. But these imitations taught me to be more economical in my writing, less verbose. Thankfully, I fell in love with Jane Austen shortly thereafter. Her novel Emma is the best of her 6 books, in my opinion. Emma is like a real person to me. I don't think I've ever read a book where the main character was so real. I could almost vouch for knowing her at some point in my personal history. After reading Emma and Pride and Prejudice, I wanted badly to write a comedy of manners, and maybe I will someday. Reading shapes the way we write and how we look at the world. We naturally imitate the style and rhetoric of the authors we read deeply. They orient our imagination. The word curriculum at its root means a running or a race course, a course of study. The question I often ask about curriculum, namely the books we read, is where are they running or racing to? What's their destination? I think a worthwhile curriculum runs to a virtuous imagination. When a virtuous imagination is formed, our loves are reordered toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. Without this ordering, we become like Lady Macbeth or Victor Frankenstein or George Wickham or Heathcliff, Madame Bovary or Daisy Buchanan. We are shallow thinkers. We can't clearly distinguish between the morally beautiful and the morally degraded. With a virtuous imagination, we can think in paradigms that allow us to truly act with virtue. Then we become more like Atticus Finch or Jean Valjean or Frodo Baggins or Harriet Tubman or Corrie ten Boom or Lucy Pevensie. So here are some questions I ask when making curricular decisions, particularly of the literature we read in school. Are there elements of heroism? Is there a virtuous character to latch onto? Is there a moral framework where good is not seen as evil and evil is not seen as good? Is there an overarching sense of providence? Does the book ultimately avoid despair and meaninglessness? Is the book unifying? In other words, does it promote understanding between people? Does it encourage reflection on the value of hope and beauty or the consequences of evil doing? In addition to reading, here are some perennial tips for helping youngsters learn to write well. These tips can be employed at almost any age. 1, I still do these, by the way, for my own writing. 1, read your writing out loud before revision. You may have a strong voice in your head for error and communication stumbles, but nothing catches mistakes like reading out loud. If a child is younger, reading to parents or teachers is best so that an adult can point out 2 or 3 ideas for revision. Older students can read and revise without an audience, but other people sure help. Verbal review is one of the best ways to connect speaking and writing. Play with sentences, number 2. Revising famous lines from literature can be fun and fortify skills. You are not necessarily creating better sentences. You are instead learning the commutability of the English language. Take this first line from Anna Karenina. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Change the verbs. All happy families resemble one another. Each unhappy family experiences unhappiness in its own way. Change the adjectives. All carefree families are alike. Each miserable family is miserable in its own way. Change the phrasing. All families are similarly happy unless they're unhappy, in which case they're unhappy in different ways. Tip number 3, build sentence variety. Another way to play with sentences is to prompt students to answer questions with varied phrasing. The goal is to increase sentence variety and complexity of thinking. Say the question is about To Kill a Mockingbird. How does Scout's view of her father change throughout the novel? A subject-predicate style answer might be, Scout grows in appreciation of Atticus's courage, and she honors his spirited defense of Tom Robinson and Boo Radley. This is a decent compound sentence. Ask the same question, but use an answer prompt that assists the student toward writing a complex sentence. Prepositional phrase, with each passing day. Adverbial phrase, as time progresses. Participial phrase, admiring Atticus's courage, Scout, ... Infinitive phrase, to see Atticus at the trial, ... Gerund phrase, witnessing Atticus's courage up close, Scout. Appositive, Scout witnessing Atticus's courage, ... Number 4, summary and amplification. Summary and amplification are also great writing workouts. Take a paragraph of rich prose and have your student condense or expand it. A paragraph expresses a discrete idea. It's helpful for a student to whittle this idea down to its simplest expression. By doing so, they're able to see the heart of the paragraph and why sentences are organized into a paragraph in the first place. For most students, amplification is a bigger challenge. Sometimes it's a matter of, can I be done yet? Instead of fully extending ideas for the sake of communication. I tell my students that extending your ideas is like reaching your destination on a hike. Students will often hike down a wooded trail, but they turn around before they've gained much distance from the parking lot. They have to move from a basic idea like happiness is not found in things, but in virtue. Some questions they can consider to do that are, have I provided enough context? Would description improve the reader's comprehension? Did I offer examples or evidence, or use analogies or metaphors? If I quoted the text, have I explained the quote? Amplification is not about artificially inflating the word count, but about enriching the depth and impact of your ideas. So, speak of the impact of ideas, we come to rhetoric at last. Rhetoric is the natural outgrowth of reading and writing. This is because rhetoric, in a broad sense, is established whenever writers direct their ideas to an audience. By rhetoric, I mean the art of persuasive writing and speaking. If writers are persuasive in content or style, they become a source of inspiration. Students want to imitate whatever persuades and inspires them, which is why I emphasize books that help to form a virtuous imagination. Ethos, the speaker's credibility, and morality by extension, is vital to a classical understanding of rhetoric. I often go to the definition of rhetorician Charles Sears Baldwin. Rhetoric is the art of giving effectiveness to the truth. Or Quintilian's is pretty good too. Rhetoric is a good man speaking well. Both Sears and Quintilian discuss the role of ethical appeal in persuasive communication. They suggest that a speaker's credibility is influenced by his intelligence, his goodwill to the people, and his moral character. Classical rhetoric assumes that truth and goodness are out there and that they need to be discovered and carefully articulated. As we know from our modern experience, not all rhetoric is ethical. Plato points out that rhetoric can be used for good or for ill. It can give power to words, yes, but it can also be used insidiously to move ignorant people. Plato says The rhetorician needs not to know the truth about things. He is only to discover some way of persuading the ignorant that he has more knowledge than those who know. And he asks, does the rhetorician really know anything of what is good and evil, base or honorable, just or unjust, or has he only a way with the ignorant to persuade them? Plato adds that rhetoric can be used as a form of flattery to tickle the ears of listeners rather than to lead them deeper into truth. So why study rhetoric in a formal way? I hope the answer is becoming obvious. It is embedded in most of everything we read or watch. The ancient saying, whoever does not study rhetoric will be a victim of it, is still true today. Rhetoric can charm and harm the people who lack rhetorical training. One of the great benefits of reviving rhetoric in our schools is to be able to name and interpret what students see and hear. Dorothy Sayers says it best in her now familiar speech, The Lost Tools of Learning. Great. If you have not read that speech, please pick it up and read it as soon as you can. For we let our young men and women go out unarmed in a day when armor was never so necessary. By teaching them all to read, we have left them at the mercy of the printed word. By the invention of the film and the radio, we have made certain that no aversion to reading shall secure them from the incessant battery of words, words, words. They do not know what the words mean. They do not know how to ward them off or blunt their edge or fling them back. They are prey to words and their emotions instead of being the masters of them in their intellects. As you may know, the progymnasmata was the primary method in Greek and Roman schools to teach young people rhetoric. We have several surviving progyms from the ancient world. Especially influential was one by Hermogenes of Tarsus, who lived in the 2nd century AD, and another by Apothonius of Antioch, who lived during the 4th century AD. Just as the Western Roman Empire was collapsing, he happened to live in the safer part of the empire. My particular progym is based on the 14 stages established by Apothonius. The progym continued the primary method for teaching writing, continued as the primary method for teaching writing during the Middle Ages and even up to the early modern period. Modern writing theory has taken the stages of the progym and distilled them into 4 basic forms: narrative, descriptive, expository, and persuasive. The problem with this distillation is that it loses some of the gradual development from one form of writing to another. The forms are divorced, separated, not on speaking terms. One of the strengths of the progym is that the different forms are integrated from one stage to the next. For example, we begin with fable and narrative, but we never drop storytelling from the compositions that follow. Narrative writing is an integral aspect of the art of persuasive writing all the way through thesis and law. For that reason, I will leave off with a story that rings true for me. In ancient China, there lived a young scholar named Lang. He was talented and knowledgeable. He practiced speaking in front of a mirror, and he read many books. But he was often overlooked and unheard in the presence of more influential individuals. Determined to improve his eloquence, Lang sought the guidance of an esteemed master of rhetoric named Master Zhang. Master Zhang was known for his mesmerizing speeches and ability to sway skeptical audiences. Lang approached Master Zhang and humbly asked for his mentorship. Master Zhang agreed to help and invited Lang to join him on a visit to a nearby village where he was to address the villagers on an important matter. As they arrived at the village, a large crowd had gathered to hear Master Zhang speak. Lang observed the master's poise, gestures, and captivating use of language, which held the audience spellbound. After Master Zhang's speech, Lang approached him and said, "Master, I'm truly inspired by your eloquence and the way you effortlessly engage the hearts of people. What's the secret to your persuasive power?" Master Zhang smiled and replied, "My young friend, eloquence is not a mere talent. It is a combination of knowledge, empathy, and genuine passion for the subject. To move others with your words, you must first be moved by the depth of your convictions. Let your words flow from the depths of your heart, and your audience will be captivated by the authenticity of your message. Classical rhetoric expresses what is authentic and vital to you and moves hearts and minds to consider what you have discovered to be true, good, and beautiful. Is writing still important? Yes. We've been doing it for over 5,000 years, and we're not going to stop now. It helps us to understand ourselves and other people. It persuades and influences. Most importantly, it will continue to humanize us.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for that thoughtful talk. There's a lot for us to reflect on, and I'm glad there will be a recording available because there are definitely some portions that I'll want to listen to again and reflect on and think about applications of. So Jesse is curating some questions. If you have been, I mean, we've all just been listening to what Paul's had to say, but maybe some questions have flitted through your mind, audience, that you would like to ask Paul, and you're welcome to enter that in the question box, and those will be curated for us, and I'll be sharing some of those in just a moment. But I want to give you a little time, everyone, to think of your questions. And so as you do so, I'll share one of the questions that I see has come up. Okay. One person mentioned that they had observed in a video, I think they said it was your video on YouTube about the ProGym, that in some way the ProGym needed updating. And they're asking, in what ways do you think updating may still need to continue, and how much might be only a juggling of texts? And who knows, maybe this was even before you wrote, and so your maybe your writing and rhetoric actually is doing that because it's bringing it into today's context. But what would you like to say to that person?
I think I was probably to the fact that I did update it. Can you hear me? All right.
Now we can. Would you back up just a sentence?
Yeah, I think I was referring to the fact that I was in the process of updating the ProGym. If you read any of the old ancient ProGyms, they are very bare bones and spare. And they presume a lot of context that's not actually written into their into the various exercises. So what we have done is we've taken a creative approach to the ProGym, and we've added in a considerable amount of background so that so it will be useful to a modern student. It's essentially the ProGyms that came out of the ancient world were outlines. And what we've done is created a full textual approach to it.
Thank you. Thank you. I see a few questions that are curious about how students can write beyond the writing and rhetoric workbook. And I know that I've been thinking about how the Progymnasmata can be integrated into a school's whole curriculum, writing across history, literature, science, maybe math. Could you say something about that? How can families or schools integrate the writing and the Progymnasmata, broader than just the
exercises? Yeah, these exercises are not limited to the exercises I have in the books. In other words, there are forms that are you can transmit them to anything you happen to be doing in class. For example, I don't do anything with Galileo, just as an example. Or a modern president, or Teddy Roosevelt, let's just say. I don't do anything with Teddy Roosevelt. You can write an encomium or a vituperation about Teddy Roosevelt. You can write a thesis about whether his presidency was efficacious, his first or second presidency. You could write a comparison to him and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There's all of these forms of writing can be integrated into whatever you happen to be studying at the time. Usually most easily into historical or literary context. But you know, it's possible to write, for example, a crea on a mathematical formula, why it's useful. And I don't think that would be stretching the exercise to do that, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It seems like in a school where a lot of times people wonder, how can I put all of this time in writing in my language arts class when we have so much reading to do or we have so much grammar to do? It seems like this could be a gift across the curriculum, that if the history or science or literature, teachers know what the students are learning in their writing courses, that then they can apply it in these ways and make their assessments more accurate, because then you're not, if the students have learned about comparative writing already in their language arts classes, then the history teacher can intentionally assign a comparative, let's compare these two generals, or let's compare these two revolutions or something like that, because the students have already had that kind of writing and thinking training. They even have the language with which to do those kinds of writing exercises.
Yeah, I'm not very fond of summative standardized tests, but the thesis essay we use at my school to prepare our students for standardized testing, because the 5 and 6 paragraph thesis essay with an antithesis included is part of that standardized testing. So there's a lot of crossover, as you're saying, and it is, yeah, it's amazing how once you learn a form, like for example, description, how you can use that in, say, a scientific context.
Yeah,
It really is transmissible,
definitely.
transferable.
Yes. Thank you.
Mhm.
I see some questions, some practical questions people have about what if they didn't start this earlier? How can they start it in the logic stage if they didn't start it in the upper elementary school? Or do they need to have grammar alongside? Do they need to have completed grammar earlier? So there are just some practical, like, how to and when should we incorporate the writing and rhetoric series into a school's overall curriculum?
Yeah. So at the school that I teach, there are students coming in at different levels. Students who will come in at 4th grade, say, or 5th grade, and they have not had some of the other exercises in the series. So the series is designed to be enough of open the box kind of curriculum that you can drop a student into this series any time along the way, and still have a lot of just have a lot of connection to their writing, and to sort of leap into a particular level without there being a loss of understanding or comprehension. But I will say that because it is a graduated program, because it's a step ladder, if you will, it's always great to have those first rungs of the step ladder, just because in rhetoric, again, you can use fables in your thesis speeches. And narratives are really important all the way through. So the earlier stages of the program can be adapted to older students, and so older students can wing through them a lot more quickly. So I hesitate to say leave anything out, but if you do, your student will still do fine, I think. Do you have a different experience, Amy? What's your
Sure.
experience?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I've seen what you've said to be true. That I would say it's a challenge and an unusual student that might jump in as late as book 9, but it's pretty because if without some other kind of very structured reading and writing disciplines already formed in their life, if it wasn't through this program, but it's very common for me to see students maybe jump in around book 5 or 6
Yeah.
and be able to build success. And maybe when they do jump in book 5, which is the confirmation and refutation series, their classmates who have already more narrative and fable experiences and have thought about summarizing and amplification, have already played with some sentence structure and sentence variety. Those students may have already more beautiful writing than their classmate who's jumping in book 5. But I think that the class discussion and the circling back around to pick up some of those skills again, and the feedback that they're able to receive from me, and then also in the guided peer editing that they have, by the end of the year, they've well caught up with the style of their classmates and are off and ready for the next level. Yeah.
Yeah, there is some catch up
Mhm.
to do, but I think for most students, it's very possible.
Yeah. And I would say that because you've integrated, like you said, it's a kind of open the box curriculum. It's there's a lot of playful elements. So when we say catching up, I don't feel like my students have felt like that they're behind. They maybe arrive to class worried that they're going to be, but it's a very interactive and playful set of activities that you've provided in the curriculum, and that's the way that the students have experienced them, from what I
I
can see.
hate to hear you say that because I was the type of student who just wanted to be running around outdoors kicking a ball.
Yeah.
So, but I did write it for the youthful me,
Yeah.
so that because writing is a lot of fun, and when students uh, anytime play is integrated into our teaching, learning becomes a joy. And
Yes.
I think there's a book called The Thread That Runs So True. And I think that's it. The thread that runs so true through our teaching needs to be an element of play.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see if we have time for another. Um, I think our most recent question has been kind of practical. Let me look back and see if there's something a little more theoretical that I can throw out for you all.
While you're looking, just in terms of grammar, I will say yes, a grammar program that doesn't have a writing component is highly recommended, because the program only touches on grammar, and that's really not its purpose. Central purpose is to grammar is a parallel study for the program.
Yeah. And I just say to everyone, in addition to that, like, I think if you noticed how Paul talked about playing with sentences, building sentence variety and saying, hey, throw in a prepositional phrase starter or infinitive phrase starter or something like that. Students need to have some experience already, some grammatical knowledge, so that they can play with the sentences and receive the feedback. Yeah. I think some people are asking questions about do you want to say anything about writing assessment? I see that we have a couple of questions about rubrics, scaffolding, assessment. Maybe you want to say something about how your textbook already provides either some some scaffolding, or how it provides the rubrics for assessment, but you may have something more theoretical that you want to say about your views on assessment as well.
Well, yes. It's interesting. I was just working on assessment policy for my school, and assessment really is sort of a map. It helps students to orient themselves and to know where they are. So if you're lost, I mean, it's a terrifying experience to be lost. And so if you have the map and you know where you are and you know where you're going, then that's hugely helpful, and it's actually comforting. And so I like to look at assessments especially formative assessments versus summative assessments as a comfort to students, as a map to help them orient where they happen to be in their progress. And so a rubric, a thoughtful rubric, you can sit down with a student and say, here's where you are. This is an area that you're doing outstanding work. Here's an area that you can work on improvement. And I always, even for the best writers I have in my class, I try to find ways that they can improve. Because if they don't hear those words of an encouragement to improve, they're going to become a little bit lazy or rest on their laurels. And it's really important for the outstanding writer and for the developing writer to hear words of encouragement, and then also to have a rubric to help them to have something to shoot for.
Yeah, thank you. Related and kind of connected to that, one of the questions was about let's see, it says your books have a lot of scaffolding to get students to an end result. How have you seen students succeed or struggle to create the specific essay style in another class without the step-by-step scaffolding? I just wanted to comment on that connection between scaffolding and the rubric, that I hear a lot of parents or students or parents who are thinking about enrolling their students into a writing and rhetoric class say, oh, my student really struggles with writing. They never know what to say. They never know how to start. And I find that the scaffolding helps the students know where to start. They've had a lot of discussion. They've had a lot of discussion about it. They've been given, here's a question that you're going to answer. And that gives them a really good starting place. And then you kind of provide them with, this is what you should put in this paragraph and another, but then, so they don't have to just kind of blindly go out there and wonder how to start. But in answer to that parent's question, how does it transfer into the other classes? I think I've had students ask that, but I think that Paul and I might have addressed that already in terms of how you can write a comparison essay in history class, or you can do a description in science, or you can do a CREA in math class or something like that.
The redundancy is there because students will absorb the various paragraphic aspects of each exercise. And then once that's absorbed by repeated practice, it can be transferred then to other aspects of your writing or other subjects too. So the redundancy is important, I think, in the scaffolding process.
Thanks. Well, we're just down to our last couple of minutes, and you are inspiring, Paul. I can tell, because I still have about 7 or 8 questions here that I could have chosen from, and we weren't able to get to all of them. So I do want to say, if those of you who still had questions that you wanted to ask and we weren't able to get to them, you can write to support at Classical U. Jesse, could you just put that email address there in the side, in case people want to follow up and ask their questions, and then they can connect you with either me or with Paul, or maybe some classical academic press representative would be able to address your questions if it's still burning and interesting to you. But Paul, before we say goodbye, is there any final word or any final thought that's been buzzing around in your mind that you just like to share and close us with?
I don't know if I conveyed enough how much I love writing. It is it's a transporting experience to reach a point in writing where you can immerse yourself in it, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you lose yourself really, and you enter a whole different world and it's a rapturous experience. And I wish that on all of my students. It's something I'm really passionate about. I really want them to enter. I want them to pick up a pen and paper with joy and say, oh, good, it's a blank page. I get to discover what I think on this page. It's a beautiful process, and I really wish it on everybody here.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. I am seeing one question I wish we had answered, and but we can't. I'm just going to say it because it's so important. Elaborating on writing as a humanizing endeavor, talking about experience working with diverse student populations at the Oaks, and how writing instruction and a sense of personhood develop in tandem. Oh my goodness, I wish that question had come a little earlier, but something for us to think about, along with just the beauty and wonder of writing that Paul has left us with here at the end. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight. I hope that you're going to go away with some new inspiration and ideas about how to incorporate reading and writing and your students and in your own lives. So thank you so much, Paul, for your time tonight and for your excellent and beautiful work and playful work of the Writing and Rhetoric series. It's a true gift to so many students and families that I've encountered. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.